A black student sits with quiet confidence as his teacher coldly returns his exam, covered in red ink. The class watches in silence as the teacher delivers a humiliating blow, but one calm, powerful line from the student shifts the air, leaving the teacher unsettled. "We don't give A's to kids like you." The words fell like a stone into the silent classroom, bouncing off the walls that smelled faintly of chalk and disinfectant. Heads turned, pens froze mid-scribble. Every student knew the teacher's reputation for harsh grading, but no one expected him to say it aloud, especially not with that cruel, deliberate smile curling under his graying mustache. The fluorescent. Lights flickered above, casting a cold glow over the scene. Rows of teenage faces stared wide-eyed, pretending not to care yet secretly holding their breath. The hum of the air conditioner grew louder, filling the silence that followed the insult. Mr. Rawlins stood at the front of the class, his posture stiff, his authority ironclad. He held a stack of graded exam papers, flipping through them with sharp, theatrical flicks of his wrist. He loved this moment, the unveiling, the chance to play judge, jury, and executioner. He slammed one paper down on a desk. B. Another on the next. C. He paused for effect, letting each grade carry its own weight. Then he reached the desk at the far left corner. The boy sitting there looked up, calm, steady, his dark brown eyes unflinching. Jamal, 16 years old, wiry frame, sharp mind. He had studied harder than anyone in the class for this test. He had stayed up late under the dim lamp in his small apartment, his mother asleep in the next room after a long shift at the hospital. Knowledge had been his rebellion, his weapon, his way out. But now the paper hit his desk with a slap. A bold red F bled across the top, jagged and merciless. A few students gasped softly, quickly hiding their reactions behind forced smirks. Others averted their eyes, uncomfortable with the tension filling the room. Jamal's throat tightened, but his face remained calm, carved from stone. He would not give Rawlins the satisfaction of seeing him flinch. Rawlins leaned forward, his voice dripping with condescension. "So you think you can outsmart me with your little essays, your fancy words, but I see through you. Effort doesn't change who you are." The classroom froze. No one moved. The message was clear, the insult sharpened to a blade, directed not at Jamal's answers, but at his very existence. Jamal's fingers brushed over the failing grade, the ink smearing faintly beneath his touch. For a moment silence pressed heavy on his chest. He could feel the weight of every pair of eyes on him, some sympathetic, others relieved. It wasn't them. Then Jamal did something no one expected. He reached for his pen, drew one slow, deliberate line through the red F and set the pen down with precision. The gesture was small, almost quiet, but it echoed louder than Rawlins's insult. He lifted his gaze to meet the teacher's eyes, calm, unbothered, resolute. "My worth," Jamal said, his voice steady and low, "isn't written in your red ink." A ripple went through the class, an invisible shiver of energy. Some students sat straighter, others stared at Jamal with something close to awe. Rawlins blinked. For a brief second, his smirk faltered. He wasn't used to resistance, especially not the kind that didn't shout or beg, but cut through arrogance with quiet dignity. The silence stretched thick and uncomfortable. The teacher cleared his throat, adjusted his tie, and moved on to the next desk as though nothing had happened. But the room wasn't the same anymore. Jamal leaned back in his chair, the failed paper before him, a symbol of the injustice etched in bright crimson. The air vibrated with something unsaid, something unfinished, and then, just as Rawlins turned his back to the class, the faint sound of sneakers squeaked in the hallway. The school's front office assistant appeared at the doorway, holding a sealed envelope. Her eyes searched the room, landing directly on Jamal. "Delivery for Jamal Carter," she said. The teacher stiffened. Jamal's hand hovered over the envelope, his calm face betraying nothing, yet inside a storm was already building. The red ink glared up at him, but now beside it lay the sealed letter. A contradiction, a challenge, a promise. The class held its breath, waiting for him to open it, but Jamal didn't. Not yet. He slid the envelope under his notebook, lifted his chin, and let the silence linger. For the first time, Mr. Rawlins looked unsettled. The bell rang with its shrill metallic cry, scattering the class into the hallways like startled birds. Backpacks zipped, sneakers squeaked, lockers slammed shut. But Jamal moved slower, more deliberate. His failing paper folded neatly inside his notebook, and the sealed envelope pressed flat against it. He walked with his head high, yet every step was weighted by invisible stares. "Did you hear what Rawlins said to him?" Someone whispered behind him. "Straight up told him he doesn't get A's." "No way, in front of everyone?" "I swear on my life, he said it like Jamal wasn't even human." The words floated around him, harsh and soft all at once, carried by the murmur of passing students. They didn't think he could hear, but he heard everything. He always did. Some glanced at him with pity, others with that strange, half-hidden envy, the kind that whispered, "I'm glad it's not me." Jamal kept walking, shoulders squared, notebook clutched to his chest. The sealed envelope's crisp edge pressed into his palm. He still hadn't opened it. Not yet he reached his locker. The metal door groaned as he pulled it open, revealing a few battered textbooks and a photo of his mom taped to the inside. Her face smiled back at him, tired but proud. That photo had been his anchor for years. From down the hall, Rawlins's voice carried low and smug as he spoke to another teacher. Jamal didn't catch the words, but the tone, the arrogant chuckle, stabbed sharp in his chest. The same tone that told him he was destined to fail. Jamal breathed deeply, letting the sound fade into the background. He slid the exam paper into the back of his locker, out of sight, and placed the envelope carefully on top of his books. He could feel its weight, even without touching it. Students streamed past, their chatter loud and messy. Yet in Jamal's head everything slowed. Why me? Why today? Why here in front of everyone? But another voice inside him pushed back. Because you were never meant to stay silent. Because truth needs a stage. He closed his locker with a sharp click. "Yo, Jamal." A voice broke through the noise. It was Marcus, his closest friend since elementary school. A tall, broad-shouldered kid with a mischievous grin that usually never left his face. But today, Marcus wasn't smiling. "I heard what Rawlins pulled," he said, his tone low, careful. "That was messed up, man. You good?" Jamal gave a small nod. "I'm fine." Marcus frowned. "You don't look fine. You look like you're holding a grenade in your hands." His eyes darted toward the envelope. "What's that?" Jamal hesitated, then shrugged. "Don't know yet. You ain't opened it?" Marcus's eyes widened. "Man, if that's what I think it is, I'll know when the time's right." Jamal's voice was calm, almost serene. Marcus shook his head, muttering, "You're built different." They walked together toward the cafeteria, where the smell of reheated pizza and overcooked fries clung to the air. Students sat in clusters, laughter and gossip bouncing off the walls. But as Jamal entered, conversations faltered, heads turned. He could feel it again, the weight of being watched. Some smirked, enjoying his humiliation. Others studied him quietly, waiting for a reaction. But Jamal gave them nothing. His silence was louder than their noise. He and Marcus sat at their usual table near the back. Jamal set his tray down untouched. His mind wasn't on food. It was on Rawlins, on the red F on the unopened letter. Across the room, Rawlins himself entered, his authority trailing behind him like a shadow. He scanned the cafeteria, his eyes landing briefly on Jamal. Their gazes met, just for a second. A silent battle. Rawlins's lips curled into that same smug smirk. Jamal didn't blink. Instead, he slid his hand over the envelope on the table. Students near them whispered, leaning in closer. The room seemed to hold its breath. Marcus whispered urgently, "You gonna open it now?" Jamal tapped the envelope lightly against the table, then tucked it back into his notebook. Not yet. The cafeteria buzzed louder, disappointment mixed with curiosity. Jamal could almost feel Rawlins's annoyance growing across the room. His refusal to break, his calm restraint, was more powerful than any outburst could have been. He looked down, at his tray, then back at Marcus. "You ever notice how silence makes people nervous?" Marcus blinked. "What?" Jamal smiled faintly. Watch. He leaned back in his chair, folded his arms, and said nothing more. Just sat there unbothered, and slowly, like ripples spreading in water, the whispers multiplied, the stares grew sharper, and the tension wrapped the room like a tightening rope. Rawlins turned away first. That was when Jamal knew. Something was shifting. Something Rawlins couldn't control. And it all began with an envelope still sealed. The evening sun draped the neighborhood in tired gold, its rays bending around cracked sidewalks and rusting fences. Jamal walked slowly, his backpack heavy against his shoulders, the unopened envelope tucked safely inside. Each step crunched against gravel, his sneakers scuffing against the concrete. His neighborhood was a place of contradictions, children laughing as they kicked a half-deflated ball across the street, while sirens echoed faintly in the distance. Houses leaned with age, but on every porch someone sat watching, protecting. It was community, rough and tender all at once. When Jamal reached his apartment building, he paused, looking up at the peeling paint and the single flickering light. Above the stairwell, home. The place where his mother's tired but steady voice always managed to soften the sharp edges of his day. He pushed the door open to their second-floor unit. Inside, the air smelled faintly of detergent and garlic. The hum of the old refrigerator filled the silence. His mother, still in her scrubs, was seated at the small kitchen table, a cup of tea cupped in her hands. "Hey, baby," she greeted, her smile warm but weary. Her eyes scanned him quickly, as mothers do, searching for hidden bruises. "How was school?" Jamal hesitated. He could see the faint lines of fatigue etched deeper around her eyes, the weight of double shifts pressing down on her shoulders. She didn't need more to worry about. "It was fine," he said quietly, dropping his backpack near the couch. Her gaze lingered, not fully convinced. "You eat lunch today?" "Yeah." A lie. His tray had gone untouched. She nodded slowly, sipping her tea. "You look tired. Don't burn yourself out, Jamal. I know you've been pushing hard." Jamal gave a faint smile. "I'm good, Ma." She reached across the table, her hand brushing his. "You're more than good. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." For a moment, Jamal wanted to spill everything, the red ink, the humiliation, the cruel words. But he held back. Protecting her from that ugliness felt like its own kind of strength. Later that night, in his small bedroom with posters of scientists and leaders tacked on the walls, Jamal sat at his desk. The failing exam paper stared at him from where he had stuffed it in his notebook. He pulled it out, smoothing its creases. The red F glared defiantly. Beside it, the envelope lay untouched, its seal unbroken, its contents a secret he wasn't ready to face. "Not yet," he whispered softly, almost to himself. "One day this won't matter. One day I'll prove it." Outside, the city's sounds carried through the cracked window, distant laughter, a car horn, a barking dog. Jamal leaned back, letting the noise blend into his thoughts. Across town, in a well-kept suburban house, Mr. Rawlins poured himself a glass of whiskey. His living room was lined with framed degrees and old photographs of academic conferences, his own face smiling in everyone. He dropped into his leather armchair, satisfaction curdling in his chest. He replayed the moment. In class, the hush after his cutting words, the way the students had looked at Jamal, the way power had filled the room. He thrived on it, convinced it was discipline, convinced he was molding students into realists. In his mind, Jamal was dangerous, not because of his mistakes, but because of his intelligence, because he refused to shrink. And Rawlins couldn't stand it. "These kids need reminding," he muttered aloud, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "They need to know their place." Yet, uncomfortably, his thoughts drifted back to Jamal's calm defiance. "My worth isn't written in your red ink." The words echoed in his head, disrupting his self-assuredness. For the first time in years, a student's voice had pierced through his armor of arrogance. He shook the thought away and drained his glass, convincing himself he still held control, but deep inside, a seed of unease had been planted. Back in his room, Jamal slid the envelope under his pillow, untouched. The weight of it pressed into his dreams, silent but unyielding. The red F and the sealed letter. Two pieces of paper, two futures colliding, and soon one would burn brighter than the other. By Monday morning, the entire school knew. What had begun as whispers in the hallway had turned into full-blown stories. Some exaggerated Rawlins's words, others downplayed them, but the truth, "We don't give A's to kids like you," had already rooted itself in the building's walls. As Jamal walked through the entrance, conversations stilled. Some students smirked when they saw him, nudging each other with cruel amusement. Others simply watched, curiosity in their eyes, waiting to see how he'd react. But Jamal's stride was steady, his gaze straight ahead. He carried his notebook against his chest, the envelope tucked neatly inside, its seal still unbroken. When he reached his first class, the school counselor appeared at the door. A tall woman with stiff posture and a forced smile, she called him into the hallway. "Jamal, can you step into my office for a few minutes?" The counselor's office smelled of coffee and paper, the blinds half closed to filter out the harsh sun. She gestured for him to sit. "I've heard some concerns," she began carefully, folding her hands on the desk. "About what happened?" "In Mr. Rawlins's class last week." Jamal sat quietly waiting. "I just want you to know," she continued, "that sometimes teachers push students harder because they see potential. It can feel unfair, but it's part of preparing for the real world." Her words slid over him like oil, smooth, rehearsed, empty. Jamal's jaw tightened. "He failed me on purpose. He said I don't get A's, not because of my work, but because of who I am." The counselor's smile faltered, but only for a second. She shifted in her chair, picking up a pen. "I'm sure he didn't mean it the way it sounded. Maybe it was taken out of context." Jamal leaned forward, his voice steady. "It wasn't out of context. Everyone heard it." The counselor avoided his eyes, scribbling something onto a notepad. "I'll make a note. But you should focus on keeping your grades up in other classes. Colleges look at the big picture." Jamal felt the familiar sting, not of Rawlins's cruelty, but of the system's silence. The way doors closed quietly, the way responsibility was shifted back onto him. He stood up. "Thank you for your time." The counselor blinked, caught off guard by his sudden exit. "Jamal," but he was already gone, his footsteps sharp against the tiled hallway. At lunch, the cafeteria buzzed louder than usual. A group of students laughed openly as Jamal passed, one of them mimicking Rawlins's voice. "We don't give A's to kids like you." The group erupted into cruel laughter. Marcus stood quickly, fists clenched. "Say that again." The group smirked but backed down when Jamal raised a hand. "Leave it." Marcus glared at him. "Man, how can you just let that slide?" Jamal's voice was calm, but his eyes were steel. "Because silence can be louder than shouting." Around them, other students watched. Some with pity, some with mockery, but a few, just a few, looked at Jamal with something else. Admiration. His refusal to break, his quiet dignity, unsettled the balance of power. Even the teachers noticed. In the teachers' lounge, Rawlins laughed off the rumors, claiming Jamal had misunderstood, twisting his words. His colleagues nodded awkwardly, unwilling to challenge him, but deep down, the story was spreading beyond his control. That evening, Jamal sat at his desk again, the red F and the envelope before him. The paper screamed failure. The envelope whispered possibility. He traced the sealed edge with his thumb, tempted to tear it open. But instead, he tucked it away again. Not yet. In the silence of his room, he thought about the counselor's words, about the laughter in the cafeteria, about Rawlins's smirk, and he whispered, "One day they'll hear me, not because I shout, but because they won't be able to ignore me." The envelope glowed faintly in the lamplight, its secret waiting like a storm just beyond the horizon. The math classroom smelled of dry erase markers and old paper, a scent that seemed to cling to the walls. Jamal sat near the window, sunlight pouring across his desk, his notebook open. The sealed envelope rested inside, hidden yet burning with possibility. Rawlins strode in, the clack of his shoes sharp against the floor. His presence filled the room before he even spoke. Students straightened in their seats, silence thickening like fog. "Pop quiz," he announced, tossing a stack of papers onto the front desk. His tone carried a smug edge, as though the idea of catching his students unprepared gave him a secret thrill. Groans filled the room, Pens scratched nervously as Rawlins dropped the sheets one by one onto desks. When he reached Jamal, he paused. Their eyes met. "Let's see if you manage better this time," Rawlins said, his voice low but audible to everyone. The room froze, tension crackling in the air. Students exchanged glances, waiting. Jamal didn't respond. He simply picked up his pen, turned the paper, and began writing. The quiz was difficult, filled with trick questions designed to trap the unprepared. But Jamal had studied. Numbers flowed through him like a second language, equations unraveling under the sharp clarity of his mind. When the bell rang, papers were collected. Rawlins sat at his desk, flipping quickly through them, his red pen already poised. Jamal stayed, seated, watching calmly. The pen scratched across paper after paper, making quick slashes. Rawlins reached Jamal's quiz, scanning it with narrowed eyes. His jaw tightened. The answers were clear, correct, undeniable. Yet the red pen hovered. Slowly, deliberately he marked an answer wrong, then another. Students watched from their seats, some leaning forward, realizing what was happening. The unfairness was no longer subtle. It was blatant. Marcus muttered under his breath, "This is a joke." Finally, Rawlins slammed the paper onto Jamal's desk. A bold red D glared at the top. "There," Rawlins said, his smile cold. Better than last time, but still not enough. The class sat in stunned silence. Jamal's chest tightened, but his face remained calm. He picked up the paper, studied the red slashes, and then turned to a blank page in his notebook. With his own pen, he began rewriting the solutions, step by step, each answer correct, each line undeniable. Students leaned closer, watching as the high truth unfolded in black ink beside the red lies. When he finished, Jamal closed the notebook and slid it to the center of his desk. His voice, steady but sharp, carried across the room. "Your pen doesn't change the truth." A ripple spread through the class. Whispers filled the air, disbelief mixing with admiration. Rawlins stiffened. His smirk faltered. He felt the eyes of his students, not on Jamal but on him. Questioning, judging. "Enough," Rawlins snapped, grabbing the notebook. But his hand froze when he saw the clarity of Jamal's work, the undeniable precision. His authority wavered. Jamal leaned, back in his chair, eyes steady. "You can fail my paper, but you can't fail the truth." The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. For the first time, Rawlins looked unsettled, not because of shouting, but because of silence that followed. The silence of students who had seen too much. The bell rang, shattering the tension. Students gathered their things, buzzing with whispers. Some glanced back at Jamal with new respect. Others shook their heads, still afraid to take sides. Rawlins sat frozen at his desk, the notebook heavy in his hands. The red ink and black ink clashed on the page, two realities colliding. And though he didn't admit it, Rawlins felt something sharp and unfamiliar. Fear. By midweek, the school hallways buzzed like a hive. They said Rawlins marked answers. Wrong on purpose. I saw it. Jamal's work was perfect. Man's losing it. The rumors crawled through lockers, past classrooms, into corners where students usually whispered about dances or football games. Now the talk was different. Now it was about Rawlins. He felt it. He could see it in the way students avoided his eyes or smirked faintly behind his back. For a man who built his authority on fear and intimidation, even a crack in that armor felt like collapse. In his classroom, Rawlins gripped his red pen tighter than ever. He stabbed at papers, circling tiny mistakes, creating them where they didn't exist. The pen became a weapon, each slash louder in his ears. But Jamal sat calmly, watching, always watching. That calmness, it gnawed at Rawlins like acid. He wanted the boy to break, to shout, to lose composure. Anything that would prove his superiority. But instead, Jamal's silence only grew louder, echoing in every corner of the classroom. During lunch, Jamal sat with Marcus again. The cafeteria noise swirled around them, but at their table there was a steady calm. Jamal's notebook lay open, his work precise and flawless. "You know he's gunning for you harder now, right?" Marcus said, tearing into his sandwich. "Man's obsessed." "I know." So what's the plan? You just gonna keep letting him mark you down? Jamal's gaze shifted to the notebook, then to the sealed envelope tucked between its pages. He touched it lightly with his fingers. I don't need his grade to know what I'm worth. Marcus shook his head, half in disbelief, half in admiration. You're different, bro. At the far end of the cafeteria, Rawlins sat with two other teachers. His voice carried, sharper than intended. These kids, he muttered, they need to understand discipline. They think they're smarter than they are, that Carter boy. He needs to learn reality before it's too late. One teacher sipped her coffee awkwardly. But if his work is correct, Rawlins cut her off. You don't understand. They look for loopholes. They play the system. I won't have it in my class. But even as he spoke, doubt gnawed at him. Because the truth was, Jamal hadn't shouted, hadn't argued, hadn't run to the principal. He had simply stood there, unbroken. And that was far more dangerous than rebellion. That evening, Rawlins sat in his study, a whiskey glass sweating onto his desk. Papers spread before him, red ink splattered across them like wounds. He tried to read, to focus, but Jamal's voice echoed in his head. Your pen doesn't change the truth. He gripped the glass tighter. His authority felt fragile, thinner than glass, ready to shatter under a single blow. No, he whispered to himself, I still control the narrative. I still decide. But his reflection in the darkened window looked back at him differently, older, smaller, weaker. Meanwhile, across the city, Jamal sat on his bed with the envelope in his hands. The lamplight glowed warm against the sharp white paper. His mother knocked softly on the door. You okay, baby? Yeah, Ma, Jamal answered quickly, slipping the envelope under his pillow again. She lingered. You've been carrying something heavy, I can see it. Don't let anyone tell you who you are, you hear me? Jamal's chest tightened. I hear you. Her footsteps faded down the hall, leaving him in silence. He pulled the envelope back, out staring at the seal. His fingers itched to tear it open, but once again he stopped. Not yet. He placed it carefully back under his pillow, whispering to himself, when the time's right. The weight of the envelope pressed against his dreams, its secret humming louder every day. And somewhere across town, Rawlins sat in his empty house, trying to drink away the feeling that the walls around him were beginning to crack. The following. Monday, Rawlins stormed into class with a different fire in his eyes. He had spent the weekend convincing himself of a plan. If he couldn't break Jamal quietly, he would do it loudly, right in front of everyone. Books away, he barked, dropping a thick stack of papers onto his desk. The thud reverberated through the classroom. Surprise test. Groans filled the air. Students slouched in their seats, but Jamal sat upright, calm, as though he had expected it. This test, Rawlins continued, is designed to separate those who think they're smart from those who truly are. No excuses, no arguments. His eyes lingered on Jamal, and no mercy. The papers were passed down the rows. When Jamal received his, he glanced once, then lifted his pen. His movements were slow, steady, measured like an athlete conserving energy for the final lap. Rawlins prowled the aisles like a guard dog, his heels clicking against the linoleum. He leaned over Jamal's shoulder more than once, breathing down his neck, waiting for hesitation. But there was none. Jamal's pen glided across the page, clean and precise. Half an hour later, Rawlins collected the papers, already knowing what he would do. He would find a way, any way, to mark Jamal down, but when he skimmed the answers that evening, his hands began to tremble. Every solution was airtight. No trick missed, no loophole left unguarded. The boy had outplayed him at his own game. No, Rawlins muttered, clutching his pen so hard his knuckles whitened. He can't be flawless. He circled problems aggressively, trying to force mistakes where there were none. Yet even to his own eyes, the red ink looked desperate, like graffiti over a masterpiece. The next day, Rawlins strode into class, ready to deliver the results. He slapped Jamal's test on the desk with a crimson mark at the top. 68%. Gasps rippled through the room. Impossible, whispered a girl in the back. He got everything right. I saw him, another muttered. Jamal didn't move. He stared at the paper, then looked up at Rawlins with steady eyes. You sure about this grade, sir? He asked softly. The class held its breath. Nobody ever questioned. Rawlins, not directly. Rawlins smirked, masking his unease. Absolutely. You're not as clever as you think, Carter. These errors... He tapped the red circles with his finger. Prove you don't belong where you imagine yourself going. Jamal tilted his head, his voice even calmer now. If I'm wrong, then maybe you could explain one of these mistakes to the class? The room froze. Students' eyes darted between teacher and student. A bold challenge had been laid down, wrapped, not in arrogance but in composure. Rawlins' throat tightened. He glanced at the paper, at his own angry circles, and for a moment the classroom blurred. He couldn't explain them. They weren't real mistakes. They were scars of his own pride. Enough, he snapped, tossing the paper back down. This discussion is over. But the damage was done. The whispers spread like wildfire. He couldn't answer him. Rawlins looked shook. Man, Jamal owned him. Rawlins felt the air shift. The authority he once wielded like a weapon had become fragile, brittle, slipping from his hands in front of 30 silent witnesses. That evening, Jamal sat at his desk at home, his test paper resting beside the unopened Harvard envelope. He traced his finger over the red ink, then quietly folded the paper. Marcus called on the phone. Bro, you turned that man inside out today. Whole class is talking. Jamal chuckled softly, but his tone was serious. It's not about winning in class. It's about holding on until the truth speaks for itself. His eyes fell back on the envelope, glowing softly under the lamplight. The seal remained unbroken, but in his chest the anticipation burned hotter. Some truths, he knew, couldn't be silenced forever. And in a quiet house across town, Rawlins sat staring at his own reflection again, haunted by the memory of Jamal's calm voice. Maybe you could explain one of these mistakes to the class. For the first time in years, he had no answer. The morning sun filtered weakly through the blinds of room 204, but the atmosphere was thick. Students shuffled into their seats, voices low, eyes alert. Word of Rawlins stumbled during the surprise. Test had spread fast. Everyone waited to see what would happen next. Rawlins entered, face taut, jaw clenched. He didn't greet anyone. He went straight to the board and scrawled in thick chalk, "Debate Day." The chalk screeched as if echoing his own frustration. "Since some of you think grades are negotiable," he growled, turning, "we'll test intelligence another way. Carter." He jabbed his finger toward Jamal, front and center. Jamal rose slowly. His chair scraped back, steady, unhurried. He walked to the front, posture calm, eyes unreadable. "This class will witness," Rawlins continued, "why rules and discipline matter more than clever tricks. Carter, you'll argue that students should be graded purely on merit. I'll argue that discipline and character outweigh numbers. Let's see who convinces the room." The students leaned forward. It wasn't just a debate, it was a duel. Jamal stood silently for a moment, letting the hush settle. Then he spoke, voice low but clear. "Merit," he said, "isn't just about numbers, it's about truth. If someone works, learns, grows, that should show. A teacher's duty is to measure honestly, not bend the scale." Murmurs spread through the class. Heads nodded. Rawlins' lips tightened. He fired back, his tone sharp. "And what of behavior? Respect? A student who questions authority undermines order. Without order, there's chaos." Jamal's gaze didn't falter. "Respect is earned. Authority without fairness isn't order, it's fear." The words cut through the room like a blade. For a moment, the silence was so complete that even the hum of the overhead lights seemed loud. Rawlins' face flushed crimson. "You dare lecture me on fairness? You think you're clever because you can parrot big words? Let me tell you something, Carter. Life won't hand you Harvard because you're good with speeches." The word hung in the air like an exposed nerve. Harvard students' eyes widened. They exchanged quick glances. Until now, Jamal had never spoken of it. But Rawlins had. Jamal's expression didn't change. "I didn't bring Harvard into this," he said softly. "You did." Rawlins felt the ground slip beneath him. His control was bleeding out, the authority he clung to leaking in front of 30 pairs of eyes. In desperation, he slammed his hand against the desk. "Enough. Sit down before you regret opening your mouth." Jamal didn't move. His calm presence filled the space like an unshaken pillar. Truth doesn't vanish because you shout over it. The class gasped. Someone whispered, "He's not afraid of him." Rawlins' throat tightened. He wanted to scream, to lash out, to send Jamal out of his classroom forever. But every eye in the room was locked on him. He felt them watching. Not him, the teacher, but him, the man, unraveling. The bell finally rang, slicing through the tension. Students hurried out, but their eyes lingered on Jamal, admiration flickering, and on Rawlins, whose hands still trembled as he erased the board with jerky strokes. That evening, Rawlins sat in his car, gripping the steering wheel, the sound of Jamal's calm words echoing in his head. Authority without fairness isn't order, it's fear. His chest heaved. He could feel it, his grip on the narrative slipping, his reputation crumbling. And somewhere across town, Jamal sat at his desk, the unopened Harvard envelope still glowing beneath his lamp. He brushed his fingers across the seal, resisting the urge to tear it open. "Not yet," he whispered to himself. "The right time will come." But even in the quiet of his room, he could feel the storm building. The next day dawned gray, the kind of sky that pressed low, heavy with unspoken tension. Jamal walked through the halls of Jefferson High, every step steady, though whispers curled around him like smoke. "Harvard, did you hear? They say he's got a letter." No way Rawlins let him pass. Jamal kept his eyes forward. The envelope was still tucked safely at home, its seal unbroken. When he entered room 204, the air was thick. Students sat straighter, alert. Something felt staged, rehearsed. Rawlins stood at the front, unusually calm, a stack of papers in his hands. His smile was sharp, forced. "Today," he announced, "we'll review an essay written by one of you. It's an opportunity to demonstrate the dangers of plagiarism and inflated confidence." His eyes slid across the room and landed on Jamal. Jamal felt his stomach tighten. Rawlins lifted the paper high. This was submitted as original work, but when checked against academic sources, it revealed striking similarities. Entire passages lifted, a fraud hiding behind big words. Gasps rippled. All eyes turned to Jamal. Rawlins smirked. "Carter, why don't you stand and explain yourself?" Jamal rose slowly, heartbeat steady, but hot anger pressing at his ribs. He hadn't plagiarized a word. He knew it. Rawlins was fabricating, clawing for control. "My work is my own," Jamal said evenly. His voice didn't shake. "Every line. If you want, I can rewrite it here, now, in front of everyone." Rawlins chuckled darkly. "Convenient. Always. An excuse, sir. Always a story. But life won't hand you Harvard because you claim innocence." There it was again. The word, sharper now, his weapon. Students shifted uncomfortably. A few frowned. One girl whispered, "This doesn't feel right." Jamal met Rawlins' gaze. His voice was calm, almost quiet. "You can try to bury me, but truth doesn't bend to your anger." Something cracked in Rawlins' facade. His lips curled. "Truth?" He slammed the paper onto the desk. "The truth is that you'll never rise above this room. No university wants a liar. And Harvard," he spat the word like poison, "would laugh at you." For a moment, silence. Heavy, deadly, then a hand rose from the back. It was Maya, the quietest girl in class. Her voice trembled but carried. "Mr. Rawlins, I sit next to Jamal every day in the library. I watched him write that essay from scratch. He even read sections aloud to ask if they flowed." The room shifted. Murmurs spread. Other students nodded. "Yeah, I saw too." "He was writing it last week." Rawlins' face blanched. The narrative was slipping. Jamal inhaled slowly. He reached into his bag, not for the essay, but for something heavier, the envelope, the one he had guarded for weeks. Gasps echoed as the crimson seal of Harvard caught the fluorescent light. He didn't open it. He only held it, steady, visible. "This," Jamal said, his voice clear, "has waited. Not because I was afraid, but because timing matters. Mr. Rawlins, you've tried to break me with grades, with lies, with threats, but you cannot define me. You cannot decide my worth, not anymore." Rawlins' eyes widened, panic sparking. He lunged forward, hand outstretched. "Give me that—" But Jamal stepped back, envelope firm in his grasp. "No." The word rang. With finality, the room erupted, not with chaos but with clarity. Students stood, some clapping hesitantly, others chanting softly, "Open it! Open it!" Rawlins' face twisted, desperation spilling over. "Sit down, all of you. This is my classroom," but his voice cracked. No one listened. His authority dissolved, scattered like chalk dust. Jamal looked at the envelope, then at the faces around him. Faces that had seen his struggle, his calm resistance, his dignity. He slid a finger under the seal. The rip was small, but it sounded like thunder. The letter unfolded, crisp and glowing. Jamal read silently first, his breath catching, then aloud with steady pride, "Dear Jamal Carter, congratulations. We are pleased to offer you admission into the Harvard class of 20XX. The room exploded. Cheers, applause, laughter, tears. Maya covered her mouth. Marcus punched the air, and Rawlins staggered back, his eyes wide, skin pale. The walls seemed to close in on him. "No," he whispered. "No, this isn't possible. You don't belong there." But the words had no weight anymore. No one believed him. Jamal folded the letter carefully, reverently. His eyes met Rawlins'. "You were right about one thing," Jamal said softly. "Life won't hand me Harvard. I earned it, despite you." The bell rang. Students surged around Jamal, patting his back, celebrating. Rawlins stood frozen, forgotten, a relic of an authority that had already collapsed. As Jamal walked out, the letter clutched firmly in his hand, Rawlins sank into his chair, trembling. His reign of fear was over, and he knew it. The corridors of Jefferson High buzzed with energy long after the final bell. Word traveled faster than wildfire. Jamal Carter got into Harvard. Mr. Rawlins tried to destroy him, and failed. Whispers became stories, stories became proof, and proof became undeniable. By the next morning, everyone knew. Jamal walked through the halls, shoulders steady, chin raised, not in arrogance but in peace. He wasn't invisible anymore. He wasn't a shadow beneath someone else's foot. He was light. Teachers nodded at him. Students who had once ignored him now moved aside with quiet respect. And yet, Jamal's expression remained calm. He had no need to gloat. His victory was in silence, in dignity. But Rawlins was unraveling. In the faculty lounge, whispers clawed at his ears. Did you hear what he did? Fabricated plagiarism. Against his own student. That Harvard letter was real. The boy earned it. Rawlins slammed his coffee cup down so hard it cracked. He muttered under his breath, They'll see he doesn't belong." But his words trembled, weak, stripped of venom. At noon, an announcement echoed through the school. "Mr. Rawlins, please report to the principal's office immediately." The hall quieted as he walked, stiff and brittle. His tie sat crooked, his eyes darting like a trapped animal's. Students stared openly, no longer afraid. Some even smirked. Inside the office, Principal Hernandez waited, stern-eyed, a stack of complaints before her. Jamal sat too, invited, not accused. Rawlins sneered. "This is absurd. You're taking his side. A child's word against mine?" Hernandez's voice was sharp steel. "Not just his word. We've spoken to students who witnessed your accusations. We've reviewed Jamal's work, and we've confirmed his Harvard admission letter." She leaned forward. "This isn't about a grade anymore, Mr. Rawlins. This is about abuse of authority." For the first time, Rawlins' mask cracked fully. His voice shook. He doesn't deserve Harvard. He doesn't deserve this. I built this classroom. I set the standards. And you're letting him humiliate me." Silence fell. Then, Jamal spoke softly, every word deliberate. "I never wanted to humiliate you. I only wanted to be seen as human, to be treated with fairness. That's all." The words cut deeper than any insult. Rawlins collapsed into the chair, his arrogance drained. He looked small, almost pitiful. The mighty teacher who once towered now sat like a man broken by his own hate. Principal Hernandez's voice was firm. "You are suspended. Effective immediately, pending review by the board. Rawlins' mouth opened, then closed. No excuses left. No audience willing to believe him. As he was escorted out, the halls erupted again, not in cheers, but in the heavy silence of justice delivered. Students watched him go, eyes wide, realizing they had witnessed the fall of a man who thought himself untouchable. Jamal stood outside the office, the afternoon sun streaming through tall windows. The envelope was still in his hand, folded but safe. Marcus ran up, grinning ear to ear. "Man, you did it. Harvard, bro. Rawlins is finished. This is history." Jamal smiled faintly. "It's not about him anymore. It's about what comes next." They walked together, footsteps echoing on polished floors. That evening, Jamal sat at his kitchen table. His mother, eyes wet with pride, held the Harvard letter as if it were gold. "Your father would be so proud," she whispered. "You fought with silence, with dignity. That's strength, Jamal. Real strength." Jamal looked at her, heart full, and nodded. "I didn't win alone. Everyone who stood up, everyone who spoke truth, they're part of this too." He thought of Maya's trembling voice, Marcus' loyalty, even the classmates who had finally seen the truth. The battle wasn't his alone. It was a quiet revolution, planted in one classroom, now echoing through the halls. Outside, the city hummed. Jamal stepped onto the porch, breathing in the night air. For the first time, the world didn't feel heavy on his shoulders. He looked up at the stars, Harvard's crimson future glimmering in his mind. He wasn't just stepping into a university. He was stepping into a life where dignity triumphed over arrogance, where truth burned brighter than lies. Behind him, the door creaked. His mother's voice was soft, warm. "Jamal, say something. For yourself. One line. What do you feel right now?" Jamal smiled, eyes never leaving the stars. His words were calm, unshaken, but carried the weight of every battle he had endured. "I feel free." And with that, the story closed. Not with a shout, not with a scream, but with the quiet power of a boy who refused to bow, and a man who learned too late that hate cannot bury truth.